An elderly man was thinking his daughter was taking him to a nursing home, steps out of the car only to be completely stunned. What did he see? This heartwarming twist will leave you speechless. Also, please comment where you're listening from, and if you enjoy stories like these, subscribe for more narratives. John Harris, a 73-year-old man, sat quietly in his small room in Bournemouth, gazing out of the window at bustling city streets below. He had always been a man of pride, a man who valued his independence, but now his body had grown weaker, his memory hazier and his heart heavier living with his daughter Sarah and son-in-law Richard. John felt like a shadow of the man he used to be. John had a plan. He had decided he no longer wanted to be a burden. He felt guilty every time he saw the grandson's room he now occupied, the quick goodbyes his family gave before heading to work, and the meals delivered by Margaret, their neighbor. Though they welcomed him with open arms, John couldn't help but feel like an intruder in their lives. The idea of moving to a nursing home seems more like a relief to everyone. But beneath his stoic exterior, John longed for something he couldn't name. Sarah and Richard's home was a world apart from the quiet Dorset countryside where John had spent most of his life. The hum of traffic outside, the hurried conversations, and the chaotic schedules left John feeling invisible. He didn't just feel forgotten. He felt unnecessary. John's life hadn't always been this way. His mind often drifted back to Dorset, where he and his late wife Eleanor built a life together in their small wooden home. Eleanor had brought warmth to his world, her laughter echoing in every corner of their house. Eleanor had adopted Sarah when they got married. The girl wasn't his by blood, but from the first moment Sarah called him Papa, John had vowed to give her everything. Together, they turned a modest home into a sanctuary filled with love and joy. John and Eleanor had a poultry where they reared birds, hens, and cockerels. Every 3 weeks, about 1,500 eggs are hatched, and for the next 8 weeks, they are carefully raised, vaccinated, and then taken off the heat before being sold to customers. But all of that changed the night of the fire. One evening, John lit a candle to fight the dark. When a power outage left his home without light, exhausted from a day of hatching eggs, he fell asleep on the sofa. By the time he woke, the air was thick with smoke. Neighbors broke down the door, dragging him to safety, but the house, his memories, Eleanor's memories, his belongings and their shared life was reduced to ashes. When John awoke in the hospital 28 days later, the doctors told him he had been lucky to survive, but he didn't feel lucky, he felt empty. When Sarah brought him to Bournemouth to recover, John left not only his home behind, but also a peaceful soul. Life in Sarah's home wasn't what John had hoped. Sarah and Richard were busy with work and seemed distant, leaving Margarete, the neighbor, to care for his meals and needs. Her cheerful chatter, a brief respite from the loneliness that settled into his days. Though kind, Margaret didn't hold back her opinions. "They don't want you here, John," she said one day, shaking her head. "It's the same everywhere. Once we get old, our children don't want to deal with us." Her words haunted him. On his birthday, John sat alone with a little cake Margarete had left him. Sarah and Richard had wished him well that morning, but didn't stay to celebrate. The loneliness was suffocating. John couldn't take it any longer. One evening, after yet another solitary meal, John approached Sarah. "Take me to a nursing home," he said firmly. "Sell my land in Dorset, use the money to pay for it. I don't want to be a burden to you or Richard anymore." "Papa, not now. We'll talk about it later. I've had a long day," she replied, brushing off the conversation. "If you won't do it, I will. I'll find a nursing home myself." Sarah simply patted her dad's shoulder and walked away, leaving John feeling more invisible than ever. Days led into weeks, and John's pleas to be taken to a nursing home seemed to vanish into thin air. Each night he sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the worn photograph of Eleanor he kept tucked in his wallet, whispering to her. His heart felt heavier with every passing day, the silence in Sarah and Richard's home amplifying his loneliness. Then one bright Saturday morning, everything changed. Sarah walked into John's room carrying a crisp white shirt, a pair of neatly folded slacks, and a new set of toiletries. Richard followed with fresh towels and sheets tucked under his arm. "Pack your things, Papa." Her tone steady but unreadable. "We're going on a trip." John froze, his hands trembling as he clutched the photograph. The words echoed in his ears, filling him with a bittersweet mix of relief and sorrow. Finally, he thought, they're taking me to a nursing home. He nodded silently, not daring to meet Sarah's eyes, afraid that he might see pity or worse, guilt. He packed quickly, methodically, folding his few clothes with precision. His heart ached as he placed Eleanor's photograph on top of the pile, zipping the suitcase with a finality that felt like a goodbye. The car ride began in silence. The hum of the engine, the only sound. John sat in the back seat, clutching his suitcase tightly, his knuckles white. Richard drove, his eyes fixed on the road while Sarah stared out of the window, a small smile playing at her lips. To John, her smile felt out of place, a hint of joy on what he believed was meant to be a somber day. As they left Bournemouth, the city gradually gave way to rolling hills and sprawling farmland. The scenery seemed to be blurred together, but to John, every detail stood out vividly. The weathered fences lining the road, the clusters of wildflowers dotting the fields, the occasional old oak tree standing tall against the sky. The sights reminded him of his younger days of drives with Eleanor through the countryside, their laughter filling the air as they imagined growing old together. John's thoughts drifted further into the past. He remembered Eleanor's laugh, the way it bubbled out of her when he told one of his terrible jokes. He remembered Sarah's first steps, how his little girl had stumbled and fallen into his arms, her giggle echoing through their home, and he remembered his farm in Dorset. The joy of collecting warm eggs from the nests, knowing they represented the fruits of his labor. He let out a shaky sigh, his eyes welling up. He wasn't just leaving his family behind. He was leaving behind a lifetime of memories, a home that no longer existed and the dreams he and Eleanor had once shared. Richard glanced at John on the rearview mirror, noticing the old man wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. "You okay back there, Papa?" he asked, his tone casual but concerned. John quickly stuffed the handkerchief back into his pocket and forced a small nod. "Just tired." Sarah turned around in her seat and smiled softly at him. "We're almost there. You'll feel better soon." John nodded again, his throat tightening. Almost there. The words rang in his ears. Was it a promise of relief or a confirmation of his greater fear? As the car climbed a winding road, surrounded by dense trees, Roberto realized he no longer recognized the area. His heart began to race. There were no houses, no signs of civilization, only the occasional break in the trees where sunlight streamed through. The road seemed endless, stretching into a lonely horizon. He swallowed hard, his hand gripping his suitcase tighter. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "You'll see," Richard replied cryptically, a faint smile on his lips. John's mind raced with possibilities. Was this road leading to a secluded nursing home, far from the city? Was this their way of leaving him behind? Out of sight and out of mind? The car eventually slowed, crunching over gravel as it pulled into a clearing. Richard killed the engine and turned to face John, his expression unreadable. "We're here, Papa." Roberto hesitated, his body stiff, as Richard stepped out and opened the back door. He helped John out of the car, guiding him gently as Sarah grabbed the suitcase. John adjusted his glasses, his heart pounding in his chest. He squinted against the sunlight, expecting to see the dull gray facade of a nursing home. Instead, his breath caught in his throat. Before him stood a house he recognized all too well. His house, but it wasn't the charred, blackened skeleton he had last seen. It was fully restored, gleaming as if it had been plucked from his memories and brought back to life. The white paint shimmered under the sunlight. The porch railings were sturdy and new, and the windows sparkled with a clarity that felt surreal. John's knees buckled, and Richard quickly caught him. "Careful." "Papa," he said softly. What is this?" John stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening. "Welcome home, Papa." As John stood before the gleaming facade of his rebuilt home, his legs wobbled and he clutched Richard's arm for support. It wasn't just the house, it was the life it represented. A life he thought had turned to ash along with his wooden beams. He blinked rapidly, trying to convince himself this wasn't a dream. "Come inside, Papa." Richard said gently, leading him toward the porch. Sarah followed carrying his suitcase. John hesitated for a moment, his finger brushing over the smooth, freshly painted railing. The smell of pine and varnish filled the air. Each step onto the porch felt surreal, like stepping into a memory that had been resurrected. The front door creaked open, revealing the interior. John gasped. The layout was familiar, yet everything felt new. Polished wood floors and all painted in soft, warm tones and furniture that echoed the cozy charm he and Eleanor had once created together. On the mantel above the fireplace, a single framed photograph caught his eye, a picture of him and Eleanor on their wedding day. Their smiles frozen in time. How? John's voice broke as he turned to Sarah. Sarah gestured for him to sit in his old chair, restored and reupholstered with the same fabric Eleanor had once chosen. Papa, we never planned to send you to a nursing home, she began, her voice thick with emotion. We knew how much this house meant to you, so when it burned down, we made it our mission to rebuild it. We couldn't tell you because we wanted it to be a surprise, Richard chimed in, his hand resting on John's shoulder. We used the land you loved so much as the foundation for something new. The neighbors chipped in too. Everyone wanted to help. Sarah reached into a drawer and pulled out a worn envelope. Do you remember those papers you signed months ago? John nodded, his brow furrowing. You said it was to sell the land. Sarah shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. No, Papa. They were construction permits. We needed your approval to start rebuilding. Every nail, every beam, it's all for you. Roberto's eyes filled with tears, his breath hitching. I thought I had lost everything. Eleanor, this house, everything. Sarah handed him a thick photo album, its edges slightly singed but intact. Not everything, Papa. Look. John's hands trembled as he opened the album. Inside were photographs that had survived the fire, pictures of him and Eleanor dancing at their anniversary. Sarah is a baby taking her first steps and Eleanor planting flowers in the garden. The pages smelled faintly of smoke, but the images were vivid, bursting with life. John traced his fingers over a photograph of Eleanor holding a basket of freshly picked vegetables, her smile radiant. She loved flowers and gardening, he murmured, tears spilling onto the page. Just as he thought, his heart couldn't take any more. A familiar sound reached his ears. A gentle huff echoed from outside. Pulling John from his reverie, he froze, his eyes whitening. Is that John grinned and gestures toward the door? Come and see. Sarah shuffled to the porch, his heart pounding. Here came Rusty running, barking happily, his tail wagging like a banner of joy. John exclaimed, tears now flowing freely. He hurried down the steps as fast as his legs could carry him. The dog turned his head, recognizing its old master. He jumped up and down John and nipped playfully at his boots. His beloved dog. Roberto wrapped his arms around Rusty's neck, burying his face in the animal's fur coat. You're alive. I thought I'd lost you too. Sarah joined John on the porch watching the emotional reunion. We found him a few weeks after the fire, she explained. He'd wandered into the outskirts of town. The neighbors helped care for him until we could bring him back. John stood there for a long moment, his hand gently stroking Rusty's fur coat. The warmth of the dog's body, the solid feel of the house behind him and the presence of his family filled him with a deep, unshakable peace. He turned back to Sarah, his voice choked with gratitude. You did all of this for me? John asked, his voice trembling. Sarah nods. You've done so much for me, Papa. For us? This is just a small way to show you how much we love you. John shook his head overcome. This isn't small, sunshine. This is everything. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, John sat on the porch with Sarah and Richard. Rusty played peacefully in the yard, and the instant sound of crickets filled the air. John clutched the photo album to his chest, a smile playing on his lips. For the first time in years, he felt whole. His heart, once heavy with loss and loneliness, was now brimming with joy. The home he thought he'd lost forever had been returned to him not just in bricks and wood, but in love, effort, and family. I was wrong. John said softly, breaking the silence. I thought I was a burden, but you've shown me that I'm anything but. Sarah reached over and clasped John's hand. You're not a burden, Papa. You're our foundation. John looked at his daughter and his son-in-law, then at the house, then at Rusty lying down peacefully. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe it. Overwhelmed with gratitude, John hugged Sarah tightly. I'm so sorry, Sunshine, he said. I doubted you and thought you didn't care. Sarah shook her head. You've never been a burden, Papa. We just wanted to give you the home you loved. You deserve it. That evening, John unpacked in his rebuilt home, his heart full for the first time in years. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the newly rebuilt house, John found himself standing in the middle of the living room, his eyes darting from corner to corner. Every detail, every plank, every photograph on the wall spike of love, dedication, and a daughter's unwavering commitment to her father. Sarah stood beside him, a quiet smile on his face. Richard stood beside John, all three in the space that held decades of memories. John's throat tightened. He turned to Sarah, his voice trembling. I don't know what to say. I doubted you. I thought you didn't care, that you wanted to get rid of me. Sarah's eyes softened and she stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her father's shoulder. Papa, you've never been a burden. Not once. Everything we did, all the late nights, all the weekends spent building this house, it was all because we love you, because you deserve to be happy. The sincerity in Sarah's voice was like a balm to John's wounded spirit. Overcome with emotion, John pulled his daughter into a tight hug. He held on as if letting go would undo everything, as if this embrace could convey the gratitude he couldn't put into words. I'm so sorry, John whispered, his voice muffled against Sarah's shoulder. I let my fears and loneliness blind me. I should have trusted you. Richard hugged both of them. Sarah pulled back, just enough to look her father in the eyes. You've done so much for me, Papa. You raised me, loved me, gave me a life I never would have had without you. This is the least I could do for you. The moment lingered, heavy with unspoken words. Sarah gestured toward the old armchair near the fireplace, the very chair John spent countless evenings in, reading or simply gazing at the stars through the window. Come sit, Papa. There's more. John sat down, his fingers brushing over the armrests. The chair had been reupholstered, but it still carried the same comfort, the same familiarity. Richard knelt beside him and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small leather-bound book. This. Richard began handing it to Roberto. It's a journal Eleanor kept. I found it while sorting through some of the things we managed to save after the fire. John's hands trembled as he opened the journal. The pages were yellow but intact, filled with Eleanor's neat handwriting. As he read, her words seemed to leap off the page, wrapping around him like a warm embrace. She had written about their life together, her love for him and her dreams for their family. She wanted this house to always feel like home, John said quietly. I thought you should have this so her voice could always be with you. John's vision blurred as tears filled his eyes. Thank you, he choked out. This means everything to me. Later that evening, after dinner Sarah had prepared, John began unpacking his belongings. John and Sarah had left him to settle in, promising to return the next day with supplies to help him get started with his poultry. As John opened his suitcase, he felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. He pulled out his old photo frames, placing them carefully on the mantel. A picture of Eleanor smiling in their garden took center stage, her presence anchoring the room. Next, he arranged small keepsakes, a carved wooden bird Eleanor had once gifted him, a brass key from the original house, and a clock that had been in the family for decades. Each item carried a story, a memory that was now intertwined this new chapter of life. As John continued unpacking, he came across a small box at the bottom of his suitcase. Inside was an envelope addressed to Sarah. It was a letter he had written weeks ago during one of his loneliest nights in Bournemouth. He had apologized for being a burden and asked Sarah to forgive him for the trouble he had caused. John held the letter in his hands for a long moment before tearing it into pieces. No more doubts, he said to himself softly. Sarah has shown me that love doesn't count burdens, it only counts blessings. Before turning in for the night, John stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of earth and wildflowers. Rusty stood digging nearby, lifting his head as John approached. He ran his hand along the dog's fur coat, speaking to him as if they'd never been apart. "We're home, Rusty," John said with a smile. "And it's better than I could have ever imagined." The stars twinkled above their light mirrors in the glistening windows of the house. For the first time in years, John felt truly at peace. He had thought he had lost everything: his wife, his home, his purpose. But tonight he realized he had gained something even greater: the knowledge that he was loved deeply and unconditionally. As he walked back inside and closed the door behind him, he paused for a moment, listening to the silence of the house. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of belonging. The weekends became a time of joy as Sarah and Richard visited regularly. John restored his poultry and cared for Rusty, rediscovering the peace he had thought was lost forever, while some elderly parents are abandoned or sent to nursing homes. Love and understanding can create miracles. Sarah may not have been John's biological daughter, but the bond they shared was unbreakable, a testament to the power of family. What do you think of Sarah's decision to rebuild her father's home instead of sending him to a nursing home? Would you have done the same? Or handled it differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think of this touching story. Please like if you enjoyed this story, and we will see you in the next video.